the president has definitively stated U.S. boots will not be on the ground in Ukraine, but we can certainly help in the coordination and perhaps provide other means of security guarantees to our European allies. The president understands security guarantees are crucially important to ensure a lasting peace, and he has directed his national security team to coordinate with our friends in Europe and also to continue to cooperate and discuss these matters with Ukraine and Russia as well. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. How are you? Good to see all of you. What we've witnessed President Trump accomplish over the last few days has been nothing short of remarkable. We are now 3.5 years into the war between Russia and Ukraine, a brutal conflict that has claimed hundreds of thousands of Russian and Ukrainian lives and cost trillions of dollars. The weakness and incompetence of Joe Biden foolishly allowed the killing to start in the first place. Until President Trump returned to office in January, the bloody and broken Biden status quo was to endlessly force American taxpayers to fund Ukraine no matter the cost, no matter how long it takes, and no matter how many lives were lost. There is no denying that Biden's America Last foreign policy moved the world further away from peace. President Trump rejected that failed approach and instead, over the last 7 months, has relentlessly pursued peace throughout his second term. And thanks to President Trump's efforts, we finally have movement after years of deadly gridlock. On Friday, as you all know, many of you were there, President Trump hosted Russian President Vladimir Putin in Anchorage, Alaska, for a bilateral meeting. This was the first time President Putin has been to the United States since 2015, and the first time he has met with an American president in years. President Putin publicly confirmed what President Trump has said all along. The war between Russia and Ukraine never would have started in the first place if President Trump were in office. This was always obvious to any person with a shred of common sense. Just look at what took place during the last 4 administrations. Under George W. Bush, Russia invaded Georgia. Under Barack Obama, Russia took Crimea. Under Joe Biden, Russia invaded Ukraine. But under President Trump, Russia did not invade nor take anything. President Trump is the only president this century, Republican or Democrat, who has held Russia in check and ensured peace in Europe. That's because Russia has always greatly respected President Trump and his peace through strength foreign policy approach. But overall, the bilateral talks in Alaska were very productive, and multiple key points were agreed to between the two leaders that truly opened up the door for Phase 2 discussions, which took place yesterday here at the White House, within 48 hours of that meeting in Anchorage, I may add. As you all know, there were many European leaders here, as well as Ukrainian President Zelensky. They all traveled here to meet with President Trump to maintain the momentum and work toward a lasting peace. Across the board, every leader credited President Trump for his decisive leadership that has reignited the dialogue in hopes of finally bringing this war to a peaceful conclusion. 2 quotes in particular capture the progress that was made and the optimism moving forward. Finnish President Alexander Stubb said, "I think in the past 2 weeks, we've probably had more progress in ending this war than we have had in the past 3.5 years. Again, that is the president of Finland, a country that shares a border with Russia. That's what we call the President Trump effect. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte also summed it up well. Without President Trump, this deadlock with Putin would not have been broken. He is the only one who could do this." Following the encouraging conversations yesterday, President Trump spoke with President Putin by phone, and he agreed to begin the next phase of the peace process, a meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky, which would be followed, if necessary, by a trilateral meeting between President Putin, President Zelensky, and President Trump. As the president said, Vice President Vance, Secretary Rubio, and Special Envoy Witkoff will continue to coordinate with Russia and Ukraine to make this happen as soon as possible. It's very important to remember that before President Trump's landslide victory last November, there was no end in sight to this bloodshed. Now, there may finally be light at the end of the tunnel and an opportunity for lasting peace. That's because President Trump is the peace president, and American leadership is back on the world stage. It should not be lost on anyone in this room that world leaders are coming right here to Washington, D.C. for help. While previous presidents have traveled halfway around the world to apologize for America, President Trump stands up for America, and he has firmly restored America's status as the undisputed leader of the free world. In other news, on the home front, President Trump's efforts to make D.C. safe again are working. There have been a total of 465 arrests since the start of this operation on Thursday, August 7th. Last night, there were a total of 52 arrests, including the arrest of an illegal alien MS-13 gang member with convictions for DWI and drug possession. Thanks to President Trump's leadership and the outstanding work of both federal and local law enforcement, dangerous gang members like the one picked up last night will not be allowed on the streets of our nation's capital. Other arrests last night included assault with a deadly weapon for stabbing, parole violation for robbery, murder, outstanding warrant for attempted murder, assault on federal law enforcement officer, and felony assault. 4 more homeless encampments were also removed during yesterday's reporting period. To date, a total of 48 homeless encampments have been cleared in Washington, D.C. by multi-agency teams. MPD patrol units are actively working with city officials to locate and clear additional encampments and remove homeless residents off of Washington's streets. And despite fake narratives from the media, again, a significant number of the arrests have been in high crime areas of D.C. In fact, nearly half of all of the non-illegal alien-related arrests have occurred in wards 7 and 8, the 2 wards that have the highest number of violent crime, as well as homicides and assaults with dangerous weapons last year. So while Democrats continue to coddle violent criminals, President Trump and this administration are focused on putting them behind bars and unapologetically standing up for the safety of law-abiding American citizens. And the White House will continue to provide all of you with the results of this operation in the days ahead.
When it comes to the security guarantees, what is the current status of that? I know the president earlier today mentioned boots on the ground would be UK, France, Germany possibly, but unequivocally said no U.S. troops on the ground, but U.S. coordination. Can you elaborate on that, and what would the red lines be?
Sure. Well, you got to the heart of what I was going to say to all of you today on security guarantees, which is the president has definitively stated U.S. boots will not be on the ground in Ukraine, but we can certainly help in the coordination and perhaps provide other means of security guarantees to our European allies. The president understands security guarantees are crucially important to ensure a lasting peace, and he has directed his national security team to coordinate with our friends in Europe and also to continue to cooperate and discuss these matters with Ukraine and Russia as well.
Karoline, now, have the Russians responded at all? I know we spoke with President Putin last night. What has been their response? Because we've heard some reports from the Kremlin and others saying they're unequivocally against NATO troops on the ground.
Well, look, the president continues to have these conversations with both leaders. Those conversations took place in Anchorage, Alaska, again yesterday with the Europeans and President Zelensky, and he has directed his team to come up with a framework for these security guarantees that can be acceptable to help ensure a lasting peace and end this war.
And then just last question real quick on this. Regarding some of the funding, we're hearing questions about another round of weapons sales or possibly a round of U.S. purchases of Ukrainian drones. Will that money be funded by the U.S. taxpayers? Are we finally going to see an end to the U.S. taxpayer-funded, seemingly endless mandate for these foreign wars?
Well, the president is very sensitive to the needs of the American taxpayer, and immediately upon entering office back in January, he made it very clear that we're not going to continue writing blank checks to fund a war very far away, which is why he came up with the very creative solution to have NATO purchase American weaponry, because it is the best in the world, and then to backfill the needs of the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people and their military. So that's the solution the president has came up with. We'll continue to see that forward. As for any additional sales, I'll have to defer you to the Department of Defense.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jack. Kelly.
What has President Trump learned that tells him that Vladimir Putin would be willing to make a deal for him, for President Trump?
Well, the president has learned a lot, which is part of the reason he opened up this dialogue. The previous administration, who oversaw the beginning of this war, refused to talk. And President Trump has always said, in order to learn, in order to move the ball forward with diplomacy and towards peace, you have to have open dialogue. And so that's why the president has had several conversations by phone and, of course, an in-person meeting last Friday with President Putin. He also has talked to President Zelensky dozens of times, had him here at the White House conference yesterday, and he's understanding what both sides want, what both sides are going to have to give up. And he has always said, in order to get a good deal, both sides are going to have to walk away a little bit unhappy. So he continues to learn a lot throughout these conversations, which is why we've seen progress from both sides. And I would also just add, when it comes to learning and moving the ball forward, look at how both Russia and Ukraine have actually talked directly for the first time in many years, thanks to the efforts of this president and this administration.
Specifically for President Trump, though, what do you think Putin's motivation is to try to do something for President Trump, as opposed to just resolving the conflict?
I think, as I just spoke to in my opening remarks, Kelly, Russia and all countries around this world actually respect the United States again, and the president is using the might of American strength to demand that respect from our allies, our friends, our adversaries all around the world. And we've seen that not just lead to progress with Russia and Ukraine, but also we've seen it in the closing of 7 global conflicts around the world as well. We've seen it with the release of hostages in Gaza. You've seen it with the end of the conflict between India and Pakistan, which could have resulted in a nuclear war if we had not had a president who believed in the strength and the leverage that comes with the job of being the President of the United States of America. Rachel.
Thanks, Caroline. Heading into Alaska, a lot of the focus in the talk was on this trilateral meeting between these 3 leaders. Can you explain how this went from a trilateral meeting involving President Trump to now the focus being on this bilateral meeting without the president first?
Well, look, the president has spoken to both leaders about this, and both leaders have expressed a willingness to sit down with each other. And so our national security team will help both countries do that. Ultimately, the president has always said that there are areas of disagreement in this war that will have to be discussed and decided upon by these 2 countries. And so he wants these 2 countries to engage in direct diplomacy. He's said that from the very beginning, which is why he's agreeable to the idea of having President Zelensky and President Putin get together. And I understand accommodations for that meeting are underway. As soon as we hear more details, we'll be sure to let all of you know.
And just a quick follow-up. We know as of right now there is no ceasefire in place. We've seen Russia continue its attacks on Ukraine. What indications is the president getting from Putin that he wants to have this meeting with Zelensky soon?
Because he spoke to him directly yesterday.
And he expressed that sooner rather than later.
He spoke to that directly yesterday, and the president put that in his statement that he gave to all of you, the news media, knowing you'd be asking following that conversation in the effort of transparency. Haley.
Hey, thanks, Caroline. You made clear note U.S. boots on the ground. Is the president considering U.S. boots in the air as a form of a security guarantee?
Look, that was something the president mentioned on his interview this morning. It is an option and a possibility. I won't certainly rule out anything as far as military options that the president has at his disposal. I'll let him do that. I can tell you he's definitively ruled out boots on the ground.
Thank you, Caroline. I wanted to ask about the National Guard troops. How is the White House coordinating with how they're being placed in D.C., what areas? And then also, how long should people here in the district anticipate the National Guard to be on the ground patrolling the streets?
I don't have a timeline for you, Libby, but we will keep you posted on that. I think the president, as you know, and this administration, he came to this briefing room with members of his cabinet to lay out the rationale and the reasoning for federalizing the National Guard here in Washington, D.C., and for our work with the Metropolitan Police Department to make our district safer. We've seen violent crime has taken the lives of far too many residents here in our nation's capital, and the president wants to make it safe again. And as for the coordination efforts, this interagency team is meeting and talking daily. In fact, there's a meeting taking place right now in the West Wing with members of the interagency task force to continue to discuss not just the National Guard deployment, but also how we can continue to remove public safety threats off of the streets of Washington, which, as the numbers I just showed you prove, they are doing every single night. I will just reiterate, 465 total arrests and counting since the start of this operation. I believe 11 or 12 days ago. I'll have to check the calendar, but those are pretty remarkable results. If not for this task force and their high level of coordination and the leadership of this president, there would have been 465 more violent criminals on the streets of this capital that you all live in every day. So I think we should all be very grateful for that. Stephen.
Thank you, Caroline. 3 questions about the D.C. crackdown.
Sure.
First, I was wondering if you could clarify something President Trump said. He mentioned getting rid of the slums where criminals live. Was he talking about tents or permanent residential buildings? And then the mayor has expressed an interest in clarifying how much of a focus illegal immigration enforcement as part of this crackdown. Can you say anything about that?
Sure.
And third, any preview on the beautification?
3 questions. I'll try to answer all 3 of them pointedly for you. First, when it comes to what you said, and the president said, the slums of Washington, D.C., he's referring to the most dangerous communities, neighborhoods, and streets in this city where, unfortunately, violence has ravaged these communities and taken the lives of, again, far too many law-abiding D.C. residents. We know on July 5th of this year, just more than a month ago, a 3-year-old beautiful young girl was shot and killed in her car with her family in one of these communities, which is why there has been a surge, despite what many of you have been falsely reporting. And I believe it was the Washington Post who put out a map claiming it to be fact-based when it was just based on, I don't know, accounts that they've heard on the street, not actual statistics and data. So we went and reconfigured the numbers, and as I said, nearly half of all the non-illegal alien-related arrests have occurred in wards 7 and 8 in the District of Columbia, where we know, excuse me, there's the highest rate of crime. So we'll continue to do that. And what was your second question, Stephen?
Legal immigration, how much of a focus that is?
Yeah, look, I mean, the focus is to make D.C. safe and beautiful and to remove public safety threats and violent criminals from our streets. If federal law enforcement, with the help of the Metropolitan Police Department, come across illegal aliens, of course, we are going to abide by this administration's policy of law and order, and we are going to remove illegal criminals from our nation's capital. They will be detained and deported, just like they are in every other community across the country. Kristen.